If I told you that Karen from the HOA had the nerve to invade my land, calling the police saying I was an invader, would you believe me? The woman appeared out of nowhere when I was measuring the area with an old tape measure and the sun was splitting my head. Not even a good morning. Nothing. The first thing she did was cough loudly, like someone who wants to attract attention without being cordial. I turned around, and she was already there, smiling like someone who smells their own flatulence and thinks it's French perfume. "So, have you asked the HOA for permission to be here?" was what came out of her mouth, but not in a normal tone. She spoke as if she were a bank security guard barring a customer wearing slippers. Seriously, I froze. My eyes must have bugged out for 5 seconds, trying to understand what was going on. I took a deep breath. I patiently explained that the land was mine, showed her the purchase contract, still all plasticized, brand new, with the smell of a notary's office. And what did she do? Ignored it. She looked at the paper as if it were a pizzeria flyer, said that the HOA had not been informed of the sale, and that, therefore, I was there irregularly. Irregular. In my lot. The woman simply decided that my CPF didn't match the decoration of the condominium. What's worse, she gave me 48 hours to remove myself from the plot, as if she had done me a favor by warning me before throwing me out with a jet of water and a Rottweiler. And that's when things started to stink. 2 days later, on a Saturday, I woke up to the most absurd sound in the world. A police car honking in front of the plot. Honking! As if it was to wake up a dead person and not to investigate a complaint. I came out of the makeshift shack I had set up with a tarpaulin and some rafters and found 2 policemen staring at me as if I were Pablo Escobar setting up a bunker. I was shocked. The woman, yes, the woman herself, had called the police saying that I was invading the lot, that I was a stranger in the neighborhood, that I was camping on private property, and that I was probably dangerous. Dangerous. The guy with a $9.99 tape measure from the street vendor and a styrofoam cup of hot soda. That's when it got even more absurd. The policeman started asking me questions, as if I were a professional thief. One of them, more politely, asked to see my documents. I showed them everything. The deed, proof of payment, ID, CPF, even the photo from the day I signed the contract. They looked, talked among themselves, and realized that, yes, I was the owner of the plot. Me, the invader. The woman turned red. Red like a bell pepper in the sun. She tried to argue that there was a clause in the HOA saying that every new resident had to go through prior approval. A screening. Screening. As if I were a suspicious package at customs. The officers, thanks to the common sense that sometimes still appears, explained that the complaint was unfounded, that I was in legal possession of the property, and that if she continued to try to remove me by force, the process could be reversed. She would be charged with abuse of authority and false reporting of a crime. But she didn't stop there, of course. She kept grumbling, saying that the safety of the neighborhood was at risk, that strangers couldn't be trusted, and that community standards had to be maintained. The community standard, as if the lot were a fashion show, and I had arrived on the red carpet in Crocs. I left that day with my head boiling, not because of the police, who were quite sensible, but because I had to deal with a person who firmly believes that the world is an extension of his own backyard, and decorated with plasticized rules. The following week, I was already being treated like the weird neighbor, the outsider, the unauthorized element, who dared to buy a piece of land without first consulting the sacred neighborhood council. Yes, because apparently, in that condominium, land wasn't bought, it was granted through divine blessing and the approval of a committee made up of gossipy old ladies and morality colonels with WhatsApp diplomas. The woman disappeared for a few days, which was a temporary relief, but it was the silence of someone who is pulling the strings behind the scenes, and I knew it. That soap opera villain vibe who disappears and then returns with a Machiavellian plan and a folder full of colorful printouts of regulations that no one has ever read. And that was that. One day, I arrive at the property and find a banner stretched across the entrance, written in bold letters, "Property under dispute, entry forbidden until regulated by HO." What? Dispute? The woman invented a dispute where there wasn't even a match. She was playing alone, creating a championship where the trophy was to get me out of the place I paid for with the sweat of my brow and a mortgage that would last until I turned to dust. I pulled out that banner like a weed puller, and I swear I considered, for a second, tying a decorative noose around it and hanging it on the fence just to return the favor with a touch of art. But I stopped myself. Civility above all else, not least because the people there were already starting to look at me cross-eyed, as if I were the protagonist of an episode of Cops about to run away in handcuffs. I began to notice subtle details that showed that the sabotage was happening in silence. One day, the bags of cement disappeared from the construction site. Another day, I found the tarpaulin torn, as if someone had gone through it with a knife. The stakes were out of place, as if someone had pulled them out on purpose. It was all done in the dark, just so, to make it look like carelessness or a strong wind, but I knew she had a hand in it. The last straw was when an inspector from the HOA showed up with a clipboard, glasses on the end of his nose, and a look like he was wasting his precious time applying anti-wrinkle cream just to be there. He came to verify that the construction was within the visual standards of the community. As it happens, I hadn't even started building anything yet, apart from setting up a makeshift storage room with corrugated roof tiles, and that's exactly what he implied. He said that the makeshift structure didn't fit in with the architectural style of the condominium. I looked at him and asked, as ironically as my patience allowed at the time, if the roof tiles were offending the eyes of the birds or interfering with the feng shui of the yoga ladies' gardens. He didn't like it. He marked something on the paper so hard that it looked like it was going to go through the sheet, and he handed me a formal notice saying that I had 5 working days to remove any unapproved temporary structures. The detail: my plot didn't have a house, a wall, or a gate, just dirt and a headache. But do you know what really hurt? It wasn't the paper. It was realizing that no one there cared about the truth. Nobody cared if I was the legal owner, if I had paid for the land, if I was there trying to build my corner. To them, I was the new element. And if you're new, you have to submit. You have to bow your head, sign the HOA papers, go to the Sunday meetings where they serve dry dumplings, and make bizarre decisions about the height of the grass allowed. But I'm not that guy. I'm not one to decorate a fence with flowers and accept that someone who barely knows me dictates what I can and can't do on my own piece of land. And then what I hadn't expected happened. A phone call, a private number. I answered it thinking it was a collection, which was already part of the routine. But it was a lawyer, an HOA lawyer. Or at least someone who claimed to be. In a honeyed voice, trying to sound friendly, he said that the association was considering legal action to prevent me from continuing to illegally occupy the lot until all the bureaucratic procedures are resolved. I almost laughed. Seriously, I had the land title in my hands, notarized, and electronically authenticated. But there, in that little world apart, that woman was helping to maintain, the law wasn't what counted. It was the association's opinion that counted. It was almost a sect with its own code, and what was on paper only worked if it didn't contradict the mood of the queen of the neighborhood. I hung up the phone, sat on the dirt floor, and looked up at the sky. I just wanted to build a house. Was that too much to ask? I didn't want a mansion, a swimming pool, or a golf course. I wanted 4 walls, a roof, a corner of my own. But it seems that when you come into the sights of someone who needs to control everything around them in order to feel important, even your basic right becomes a personal affront. By now, I had realized that I wasn't just trying to build a house. I was fighting a cold war with a woman who woke up every day determined to remind the world that she still had power over something, and in this case, the target was me, the lot, and everything that moved or breathed within that strip of land that I had paid for, with sweat and a mortgage that had more installments than a bad marriage. One day, I arrived at the plot and found traffic cones placed at the entrance. Cones. And yellow tape, like you only see at crime scenes. I stood there staring, trying to figure out if someone had been kidnapped there or if the woman had gone crazy and decided to turn my plot into a stage for investigative theater. But no, it was just another attempt to keep me out. According to the HOA itself, it was a temporarily closed area due to sanitary and environmental irregularities. Sanitary. In a lot that had more ants than bacteria, it claimed that it had received complaints that the site was being used as a waste dump and improvised shelter for potentially contaminating materials. It was an elegant way of saying that the blue tarpaulin and the tools thrown in the corner were hurting the sacred aesthetics of the condominium. And then, my friend, I lowered the bar. But I did it elegantly. I printed out copies of my contract, the property registration, proof of IPTU payment, and put together a dossier that would make a private detective jealous. I filed a formal complaint against the association, including abuse of authority, harassment, slander, defamation, and whatever else the legal dictionary allowed at the time. It was my small change, but I still had to deal with her on the real battlefield, the field where she reigned, the neighborhood. She started going around the neighborhood with flyers. Yes, flyers, as if to advertise a charity bazaar. But the content was a collection of slanders about me. It said that I was trying to cheat the system, that I refused to comply with the minimum rules of coexistence, and that my presence was a threat to the community's real estate development, a threat to a place that still had a mud street and 3 street lamps that flashed as if they were having an epileptic fit. Even my neighbors began to look at me differently. The guy on the lot next door, who used to greet me with a nod and a toothless smile, started pretending not to see me. The lady from the house on the corner, who once offered me hot juice on a hot day, now crossed the street when she saw me coming. It was as if I were a virus, about to infect the emotional foundations of the community. I stood my ground, even though I was treated like a trespasser, a delinquent, public enemy number 1 by the standards of exterior paint and white picket fences. But the woman wasn't resting. She needed a victory. And that's when she resorted to the dirtiest trick of all. She invented that I was building without a permit. She called the town hall. She sent photos. She filed a complaint. And when the inspector showed up, with a face of few friends and zero desire to be there, he was ready to issue a fine. It was close. Very close, because I had all the necessary licenses in an envelope that I took to the market. Paranoia had turned me into a walking archive. When I showed everything to the inspector, he was a bit taken aback. He looked at it, confirmed it, signed a form, and left. But before he left, he said, "She's been doing this to other residents too. Only in your case, it seems to have become personal." It became personal, and he was right. She didn't want order. She didn't want respect. She wanted control. She wanted to see someone bow down, give in, apologize for existing. And I, with my stubbornness and lack of patience with bossy people, was a thorn in the side of the queen of the playpen. And yet, I carried on. Not only did I carry on, but I began to lay the first foundations. I called in a small, discreet, but efficient team. Everyone knew about the bullshit with the HOA, so they worked almost in ninja mode. Silent, focused, almost crawling with caution. Then, one fine day, I received a subpoena, an official notice, a lawsuit. The woman sued me for improper occupation of a common area. She claimed that part of my plot was encroaching on a condominium easement, an absurd claim, since the plot was perfectly delimited, with registrations at the notary's office, an approved plan, and everything in order. But there she was, trying to take me to court as if we were fighting over a parking space in an old building. And that's when I realized she wasn't going to stop. Not until she saw my face on a persona non grata sign, or saw me selling the land for half the price just to escape the hell she'd created. But if she thought she was going to break me, she forgot one very important detail. I have time. And when I have time, I'm the kind of person who turns persecution into fuel. And there, in the midst of the dust, the concrete, the stakes, and the muffled cries of a woman who desperately needed to be heard, I discovered that the best answer was to build, brick by brick, no rush. But she still had one more card up her sleeve, the lowest, the most disgusting, and it was going to turn everything upside down. Just when you think you've seen it all, there's always room for one last twist. And this one was worthy of a Mexican soap opera with a script written by someone angry with the protagonist. The woman, in a final attempt to get me out of the game, dealt the lowest blow of all. She called the police. Yes, again, but this time with gusto, with that refinement of cruelty that only those who feel above the law can apply. She claimed that I was usurping other people's property. She used exactly those words, as if she were in a Roman courtroom. She said that I had invaded a community space, that I was erecting an illegal structure, and that I was refusing to vacate the area even after official notices. She reported me as if I were a heroic citizen fighting urban chaos. And worse, she added that I might be involved in suspicious activities. Suspicious activities. Me, a guy who drinks cold coffee because he forgets his mug in the corner of the building site. A guy who gets calluses on his feet from measuring land and drawing plans with a ballpoint pen. This woman's level of imagination would be the envy of a trash movie scriptwriter. And of course, as every good soap opera needs a twist, the police showed up. 3 cars, not 1, 3, siren on. The scene was set. This time, there was no talking. They ordered me out of the lot, hands up, document in hand, and pulled me over like I was the head of a rural cartel. And there, at that moment, I confess that my blood boiled, because it wasn't just another humiliation. It was the accumulation of everything. The false accusations, the leaflets, the inspectors, the cones, the lawsuits, and now the woman trying to make me look like a criminal on my own property. I showed her everything again. The documents, the licenses, the license plate. One of the policemen, the only one with a human expression on his face, asked for time to confirm the information. And that's when justice began to turn the tide, because that day I was already prepared for everything. I had an organized folder with everything printed out, a certified copy, even a plastic receipt for that year's IPTU. Traumatized, yes, but functional. It took the police almost an hour to check everything. Meanwhile, the woman stood on the other side of the street, arms crossed, with an audience of residents around her. Everyone was waiting for the outcome as if it were a live episode of a reality TV show. She was confident, the look on her face like she was rehearsing her victory speech. I just wanted to protect our community, but the policeman came back with a different attitude, and when he spoke, it was music to my ears. He said that everything was legal, that the documents were valid, that the land was mine, and that the complaint was not only unfounded, but that it amounted to false reporting of a crime. What's more, he asked if I wanted to press charges. I laughed, a nervous laugh, the kind that comes from a place of exhaustion mixed with an "I told you so," and I pressed charges, with gusto. The woman still tried to argue. She tried to invent a version where she was the victim, where she was trying to avoid a bigger problem. But nobody was buying that story anymore. The mask had already fallen. One of the residents who had previously ignored me crossed the street, patted me on the back, and said, "I knew there was something wrong, but she made us believe that you were the problem." That was the beginning of the end for her. With the complaint registered, the fine came quickly. A fine for false reporting. Process. Notification from the town hall itself. And, to complete the package, the HOA was forced to revise its own bylaws. And when they opened that Pandora's box, they discovered that the woman had made numerous similar complaints against other residents. A veritable history of harassment. They began to question everything. How had she become so influential? How had no one seen it before? The answer was simple. No one had the courage to stand up to her. Until now. And then, as happens with every reign based on fear and false paperwork, her empire collapsed. The association began to receive official complaints, and one by one the board members drifted away. Resignations began to pour in. Within weeks, she was alone, trying to defend a castle that had already crumbled. There was an extraordinary meeting, open, with a microphone and everything. And I went. Of course, I went. I sat at the front. I listened to the excuses, the spin, the pathetic justifications, and when I was given the floor, I only said one thing. All I wanted was to build a house. You turned it into a war. The hall fell silent. The woman lowered her head. For the first time, no argument, no drawing board, no applauding audience. Today, the house is almost finished. Brick by brick, without haste, but with gusto. The sound of hammering is the soundtrack to my victory. And every time someone passes by on the sidewalk and asks how I managed to get through it all, I just reply, with patience, paperwork, and zero desire to put my head down. Because, at the end of the day, it was my lot. And now, more than ever, so is the neighborhood. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave your like here below.